I've always considered myself pretty easygoing. The kind of person who can shrug things off, smile through awkward silences, and offer to help with dishes I didn't dirty. I don't ruffle feathers. But this trip almost broke me. It was Maria's idea. A week-long family retreat in a mountain lodge to celebrate her father Charles turning 60. Think snow-covered fir trees, hot chocolate stations, rustic wooden beams, and too many family members packed into one oversized Airbnb. Maria's family is intense, tight-knit, traditional, loud in the way that makes my ears ring. They thrive on inside jokes, shared references, and the kind of warmth that only ever seems to extend to people who grew up inside their circle. I didn't. When we arrived after a 10-hour drive through icy highways and chain-required roads, I was exhausted. But they greeted us with big smiles, laughter, and a flurry of activity, all of which conveniently flowed right around me. Maria's mom, Grace, offered me a hug that felt more like a formality. Her dad, Charles, clapped me on the back, like I was a second cousin he barely tolerated. Her brother, Richard, gave me a distracted nod before turning to talk about ski rentals with someone who actually mattered. And that was the tone for the rest of the evening. They weren't overtly rude. No one said anything cruel. But it was like I didn't register. Like I was scenery. Later that evening, everyone gathered in the main room, a fire crackling, mugs of cider, laughter bouncing off the beams. I sat near the edge of the group, trying to nod along, smile at the right times. Every time I attempted to join a conversation, it shifted, like I was walking into a room just as the lights went out. I glanced toward Maria. She was laughing with her cousins, tucked into the middle of the couch like she belonged there, and of course, she did. This was her world, her mountain, her people. And I was the outsider with snow in his boots, so I stepped outside. The night was crisp, quiet in the way only mountains can be. I stood on the porch, hands in my coat pockets, just trying to breathe. And that's when I heard it, Maria's voice. Just inside, talking to Grace. He's just not fitting in, Mom. A pause. You know how they are. They're not exactly the warmest. I stood frozen, breath curling in the air. She wasn't wrong. But hearing it out loud, that confirmation, stung. Not because it was a lie, but because it wasn't. I'd been trying. For months. At every holiday, every dinner, every family thing. And this was where I stood. Still on the outside, still waiting for someone to open the circle. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the muffled sound of laughter from the downstairs lounge. Maria curled up beside me, already asleep, and I knew. This wasn't going to be the bonding experience I'd hoped for. This was going to be survival. The next morning, I got up early. Not because I couldn't sleep, though I couldn't, but because I wanted to reset the day. New coffee, new context, new chance to belong. I made it to the dining room just as everyone was settling in for breakfast. The mountain lodge had this long farmhouse-style table that could easily seat 15, and apparently, everyone else had already found their seats, naturally, next to people they actually wanted to talk to. The only chair left? At the far end. Alone. Just one seat, isolated, like it had been strategically left open. I hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to wait or say something. No one looked up. No, hey, Ethan, come sit here. No, let's scooch down and make space. Just chatter, laughter, clinks of silverware on plates. I walked toward the empty seat like a background character, the kind you don't notice until they leave. As I sat down, I caught Maria's eye. She smiled absently and turned back to her cousin Richard, who was mid-story about some minor fender bender and the dumbest insurance guy ever. Cool. I poured myself a glass of juice, picked at a cold croissant, and waited for someone to notice I was there. They didn't. At one point, I tried to join in. The weather looks great for hiking today, I said toward the table, aiming my voice at the nearest cluster of family. Samuel, Maria's uncle, didn't even glance up from his phone. Grace gave a tight nod and returned to her toast. I swallowed hard. The room wasn't hostile. It was worse, it was indifferent. When you're openly disliked, at least it's something. But when you're invisible, that's a whole different kind of lonely. A few minutes later, Grace turned to me with a honey-dipped smile. You know, Ethan, she said sweetly, it's so nice to see you fitting in. My head tilted before I could stop it. Sorry? She dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin. You're adjusting well. I know we're a little intense. Her tone was patronizing in a way that made my spine stiffen. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile, just soaking it all in. I don't know if she heard the flatness in my voice or cared, but that sentence echoed, "Nice to see you fitting in." Like I was a temporary visitor they were tolerating, not someone married into the family, not someone who spent years trying to be part of their lives. I glanced across the table again. Maria laughed at something Charles said. She was in the thick of it, easy, familiar, unbothered. Meanwhile, I was chewing dry eggs and avoiding eye contact like I was back in middle school. Later that afternoon, I pulled Maria aside. We were alone on the balcony, overlooking a snow-laced clearing. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her eyes squinting in the winter sun. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course, she replied, brushing hair from her face. Do you notice how your family treats me? Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I mean, I'm always the last to be spoken to. No one looks at me when I talk. They literally left one seat at the table by itself, and no one even blinked. Maria exhaled slowly, like she already knew this conversation was coming. They're not doing it to be mean, she said. It's just how they are. I nodded. Right. That's what you said last night, too. That they're not the warmest. She looked away. I'm your husband, Maria, and I feel like I don't matter. Her eyes flicked back to mine, suddenly defensive. You're overthinking it. They're just used to each other. You'll blend in more over time. I laughed, humorless. I've been trying. For 2 years. If this is them warming up to me, I'd hate to see cold. I just think you're making this bigger than it is, she muttered. It's one seat, Ethan. It's not the seat, I snapped, sharper than I intended. It's everything. It's the way they only ask you about work. The way Charles never makes eye contact with me when we talk. The way Richard always redirects conversation when I speak. Maria blinked, stunned. And I realized this was new for her. I'd never said it out loud before. I'd always swallowed it, smiled through it, made excuses. But now it was starting to spill over. I can't keep pretending I'm okay with being a ghost in your life, I said softly. Not here. Not anymore. Maria didn't answer. She just stood there, hands in her pockets, watching the wind rustle through pine trees like she was waiting for a better version of this conversation to show up instead. That night, I lay awake again. But this time, I wasn't staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done wrong. I was planning what I'd do next. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was still quiet. No clinking of mugs, no echo of footsteps on the wood floors. Just the hush of snow falling softly outside the windows, blanketing everything in the same quiet that had swallowed me since we arrived. I dressed without thinking, jeans, sweater. That one flannel Maria always says makes me look like I actually go outdoors. It was the first time since the trip started that I didn't feel the weight of trying. I wasn't going to try anymore. I was going to show up and not ask permission. When I walked into the dining room for breakfast, I saw it again, the same long wooden table, already half full. Laughter, movement. A plate passed from hand to hand. There was one seat left, at the far end, like always. But I didn't walk toward it. I walked straight to the center of the table, right next to Charles, the patriarch, and directly across from Grace. I pulled out the chair, sat down, and smiled. Morning, I said, reaching for a mug. A hush settled for a beat. Grace blinked. Charles looked momentarily startled. Maria, seated one chair down, froze mid-sip of her coffee. Ethan, Grace said slowly, you're sitting here? Yes, I said calmly, pouring coffee. I figured it was time I got to know everyone a bit better. I'm part of the family, after all. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Well, that's unexpected. Charles gave a curt grunt and turned back to his plate. I didn't move. I didn't apologize. I added a splash of cream, stirred slowly, and took a long sip. And just like that, I was in the middle of the story, not the background. The room shifted ever so slightly, like people weren't quite sure what to do with me now that I'd chosen to exist out loud. As breakfast went on, I joined conversations, not waiting for permission, just stepping in. I asked Maria's cousin Lila about the hiking trails she'd mentioned. I laughed at one of Richard's jokes, even when he barely acknowledged me. I asked Charles if he'd ever been to this lodge before. He answered with a short once, years ago, and nothing more. But that didn't bother me, because it was something, it was presence. Afterward, I helped clear dishes, not because I was trying to earn points, but because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of pretending I was detached. I was engaged, on purpose. And the more I inserted myself, the more the tension began to bloom. Small things, glances exchanged, polite laughs that didn't quite land, people slowly drifting further from wherever I stood. I wasn't disrupting them, I was disproving them. Every step I took toward inclusion seemed to make them recoil just a little. Not because I was rude or inappropriate, but because I'd broken the unspoken rule, stay in your lane. That night, over hot cocoa and yet another game of charades I hadn't been asked to join, I sat near the fireplace, reading on my phone. Charles stood nearby, sipping bourbon and speaking in a low voice to Grace. "She's not going to like this," he murmured. "She?" I thought. Then I realized they were talking about Maria, about how uncomfortable this all was, about how I was forcing my way in, like existing at the same table was some act of rebellion. I didn't react, I didn't say a word, just sipped my drink and watched the fire curl and twist in the hearth. Later that night, Maria and I lay in bed, backs turned. She spoke first. "You kind of surprised everyone today. That a bad thing?" "No," she said too quickly. Then, quieter, "It's just, they weren't expecting it." "Yeah," I said. "That's the point." She didn't respond. I waited, hoping for some flicker of acknowledgement, something that said, "I see you. I understand now." But it didn't come. Instead, she rolled onto her side and turned off the lamp. I lay awake, staring into the dark, listening to the wind whistle outside our window. And in that silence, I made a decision. If they wouldn't invite me in, I'd build my own table. The next morning, it snowed. Big, fluffy flakes that fell in lazy spirals past the lodge windows. It was the kind of picturesque snowfall you'd see on a greeting card, the kind that made people say things like, "Isn't this magical?" But inside, the house was charged. Tight smiles, quick exits from rooms, a weird quiet that hummed beneath every conversation, like a string pulled too tight. I didn't care. I'd already stopped performing. I'd spent 3 days trying to earn space at a table that didn't even want my chair. Now, I was done asking for a seat. But apparently, my existence was still unsettling. That morning at breakfast, I took my spot in the center of the table again. Same chair, same mug, same presence. Charles cleared his throat when I asked someone to pass the butter. Grace answered with clipped phrases. Richard didn't make eye contact once. Maria sat beside me, oddly quiet. Afterward, while the rest of the family dispersed for snowshoeing or spa appointments or whatever curated group activity they'd planned, I stayed behind, alone. And it was glorious. I made myself coffee in silence. I read, I paced, I stood on the balcony and watched the snow blanket the pines. And then I picked up my phone, not to scroll, to speak. It started with a note. Just a few words at first, then a few more. I'd been quiet for so long that when the words started, they came quickly. By the time I moved to Instagram, I already knew what I was going to post. Sometimes the loudest exclusion is the one no one talks about, when you're married in, but not welcomed, when your seat is always the last one left, when your words are background noise and your presence is tolerated at best. This trip reminded me that you can be surrounded by people and still feel like furniture. So here's to taking up space, even when they wish you wouldn't. Not invisible, hashtag married not mute, hashtag family is more than blood. I paired it with a photo I'd snapped the day before. Me, standing on the balcony in flannel, coffee in hand, mountains behind me. Peaceful, unbothered. Framed like I belonged, I posted it. Didn't think twice. But I didn't expect it to blow up. It started slow. A few likes from old friends. Then comments. Damn, I feel this. You're not alone. This hit too hard. And then it picked up speed. By lunch, it had hundreds of reactions. By mid-afternoon, Maria found me in the lounge, phone in hand, face tight. What the hell did you post? I raised an eyebrow. Something true. You posted about my family, Ethan. You made this public. I didn't use names. You didn't have to. I set my book down. Maybe if they hadn't made me feel invisible for 3 days straight, I wouldn't have anything to write about. Her voice froze. They're shocked, Ethan. Embarrassed. My dad is furious. I've been embarrassed since we arrived, I said, standing. Where was that energy then? She went quiet. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she sighed. You're making this worse. No, I replied, calm and even. I'm making it real. She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was. I wasn't even sure I did, but it felt good. Not vindictive, not petty, just honest. And once you speak the truth out loud, it's hard to go back to silence. By dinner, the whole family knew. Rachel, Maria's cousin, pulled Maria aside in the hallway. Loud enough for me to hear, you need to control him. He's making us look bad. Control me, like I was a child. A liability. I didn't respond, didn't raise my voice, just smiled. I could see them scrambling, whispering, wondering what would happen next. And for once, they were the ones on edge. That night, as I sat alone in the reading room with a glass of wine and my phone buzzing in my hand, Maria came in again. You really won't take it down? She asked. No, it's humiliating. For who? She hesitated. For me, she finally said. I nodded. Good, because now you know how I felt since we got here. She opened her mouth to reply, but I stood and walked past her. I wasn't angry anymore, just finished. I went to our room, packed a small bag, not everything, just what I needed, and when I passed Charles in the hall, he glared at me. I met his eyes and said, even furniture eventually moves. Then I walked out the door and into the falling snow. Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped outside. The cold bit at my face, but I didn't care. It felt cleaner out here, sharper, like something had finally cleared from the air around me. Behind me, the lodge stood still and golden in the winter light. Inside were voices I no longer needed to hear, rooms I no longer needed to sit in, waiting for a place. I didn't slam the door. I didn't storm off. I just left. And that somehow made it louder than anything I could have said. I didn't go far. Just down the winding trail behind the lodge, toward a ridge Maria's family had pointed out earlier in the trip but never visited. Too cold, someone had said. Not worth it. It was. The snow was deep, but manageable. And soon I found myself standing at a small overlook that opened onto miles of forest and white-capped mountains. The sun broke through clouds, just enough to shimmer against the trees. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Perfect. For the first time in days, maybe months, I could actually hear myself think. No cutting comments disguised as banter. No silence when I walked into the room. No need to sit small, speak soft, and smile like I belonged. Just quiet. Real quiet. After what felt like an hour, I finally walked back. Not because I was ready to face them, but because I was ready to pack. I didn't tiptoe. Didn't pretend. Just walked in, grabbed my things, and zipped the bag. I didn't expect Maria to be there, waiting in the doorway. She looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. Like someone who'd been standing between two opposing winds for too long. You're leaving, she said. I nodded. Yeah, a beat passed. So that's it? I shrugged. What else is there? You're walking away from us? No, I said quietly. You let me walk away days ago. I just finally realized it. She flinched. You knew what you were marrying into, Ethan. I thought I did, I replied. But I also thought I'd matter to you. Enough to not be an afterthought in your own family's house. They're complicated. They're cruel. Maria looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she said, why didn't you just talk to me? Really talk? I zipped the last section of my bag and stood up. Because when I told you I felt invisible, you told me I'd get used to it. That landed. I could see it in her face. Then the post she began wasn't revenge. I interrupted. It was honesty. The kind no one in that house seems to know how to handle. She didn't stop me when I walked toward the door, didn't reach out or beg me to stay. And that's when I knew this part of our story was already finished. As I stepped outside, snow still falling in gentle sheets, I heard the door click shut behind me. No voices followed, no footsteps, just me. And you know what? That was enough. I caught a shuttle into the nearest town. From there, a bus, a transfer, a late-night train. I slept for a few hours in a station with my bag for a pillow. Ate the worst vending machine sandwich of my life. Answered a few texts from friends who'd seen the post. You okay? That was bold. Took guts, man. Proud of you. The notifications didn't flood in, but each one felt like a small light flickering on in a dark room. Eventually, I made it back home. A tiny apartment with a heater that groaned when it kicked in and a window that looked out over a brick wall. But it was mine. Every inch of it. I unpacked slowly, lit a candle, made grilled cheese at midnight, sat on the couch in silence and breathed. It didn't feel triumphant, just honest. A couple days later, Maria texted, "I'm back. I hope you're safe." I didn't reply. She messaged again. "I told them you left early because of work. I figured it was easier." Still, I said nothing. She finally sent one last message. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." But I get it if you don't. I didn't block her, but I didn't respond either. Some endings don't need closure, they just need distance. Weeks passed. I started cooking again, real meals, not just the ones that came from a box. I picked up extra shifts at the culinary studio I taught at. I opened a new notebook and started writing, just for me, about the mountains, the silence, the seat I took that no one offered. And one day, I logged back into Instagram. My post had plateaued. A couple thousand likes, dozens of comments, some from strangers, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years. The one that stuck out, I left a chair for someone once. They never sat in it. So I got up and built my own table. Keep going. I read it twice, smiled, then closed the app. I'm not bitter. Not anymore. I'm not angry. Not seeking revenge. Not hoping they call. Not waiting for them to understand. I just know now, I'm not someone who sits quietly and waits to be invited in. I'll pull out a chair when I need to. And if that's still not enough, I'll stand. Because being seen, being heard, shouldn't require permission. And this time, I don't need anyone's blessing to belong.